All right, welcome guys back to the Fleet Brothers podcast. Today I have a special guest. This is JR Rivas. JR is the guy that's doing everything that you want to be doing, honestly. He's active in like MMA fighting. He's training to be a pilot. He's okay at basketball. He's getting there. And most of all, he's the owner of BnB Leverage, which is kind of how we got connected in the first place. So if you want to go ahead and give like a 20-second pitch about what BnB Leverage is all about.
BnB Leverage is basically a company where we find properties that you can rent, and then we show you how to put them on Airbnb. So we find the property for you, and we have an optional service where we'll design the property for you as well, furnish it, all that good stuff.
Yeah. And if all that sounds a bit familiar to kind of what I do, there's a reason for that. We got connected way back when we were starting the business, and you helped me basically build the whole framework for the company, which was sick. Having that mentor and having you as guidance through all that was awesome. That's why especially I'm excited to do this today, because you helped me get to where I am today. So appreciate all that. But first I want to kind of start with your background. When did you realize you were an entrepreneur?
I was like 15, 16, and I just kind of looked around and I was like, this just all seems like bullshit. Like, I was not a good student. I realized that most people weren't making good money even with a college degree, and I was just very aware. So I started to look at alternative paths, and I remember I met this guy who had like came to speak at our high school, and he wrote a book. He was telling us how he was an entrepreneur, and he like started a company from his house, which at the time was like unheard of, sold it for millions of dollars, and I was like, that sounds a lot better. Like, why isn't everybody doing this? So I chatted with him a little bit, and then I just started doing research, and that's when I learned like what entrepreneurship really was. Read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was like 17, and started trying to start a company at pretty much from the time that I was 17.
That's kind of resonates with, I would assume, a lot of people. They at least like hear that story, but I don't think everybody takes action on it. I think a lot of people will meet that guy that they're like, oh, this is sweet. Like, I can't believe they're doing it. And they don't actually end up doing it.
My first job, I was 13, and I was making $10 an hour under the table. And my job was to sit on a corner and like watch a sign that was for a bed store. And it was like 80% off, grand opening sale or some shit like that.
Yep.
That was okay. I was making like $300 a week at 13. Phenomenal. Eventually got laid off from that job. So then I got another job, and I was making $5.25 an hour. The minimum wage in Pennsylvania is $7.25 an hour.
How's that legal?
They could legally underpay you because you're not old enough to work the grill. So they would just
so
put
it's
you
child
on
labor.
Basically, they just put you on the cash register and then pay you dog shit. So then after taxes and everything, like, it was like nothing. So I hated working there. Then I got another job. I worked at like McDonald's. I worked as a busboy, and every job I just fucking hated. And I would always like kind of pocket watch the owner, and I would look at like the receipts at the end of the day on the cash register, and I'd be like, how'd this guy make like fucking $4,000? Like, at the time, I'm thinking like $4,000 is going to his pocket, like profit. I'm like, how does this guy just make like $4,000 off this one register in like 5 hours? And I just worked my ass off and made like $5.25, like $25 or whatever. This just seems like bullshit. So then I just assumed like any job that you would get was some version of that same thing. I was always like, how can I be like the person that is collecting the money, not the person doing the work? And I did a lot of research, and I realized like there's a fuck ton of startup costs to start like a restaurant or anything like that. Like, you need over $1 million. Just trying to find like low risk businesses that you can start with no money. And no one was really like making money on the internet yet. This was probably like 2011, 12. And I ended up starting a tax business. And then I did that just because it was like low startup capital.
And how old were you?
18. Okay. At that point, I had just graduated high school.
So 18, you start your own business.
Yeah, I grew that to 3 locations, 50 plus employees over the course of 3 years. I realized that model was kind of bullshit too. I didn't know about leverage in businesses. I thought every business was like created equal. So I didn't realize like, there's software companies that have 20 employees that are doing millions of dollars a year. And then there's this restaurant that has like 20 employees that's doing like $700K and then taking home like 70. I didn't pick like the best leverage opportunity, but it got me like into business. It got me into the game. Then I just realized that you could make money on the internet. If there's a 1% chance that this could work, I'd rather figure this out.
And then an internet guru was born.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. It's cool that at such a young age, you had the foresight to like realize, oh wait, there's bigger things out there than just working for somebody and just doing their labor for them and making them money. And so you just decided at a young age to be top dog. You're 21 running 50 employees?
I had no idea what I was doing. It sounds cool, but like it was a shit show.
What was the shit show about it?
I mean, there was 50 employees and they were all seasonal. So they did taxes like, 5 months out of the year. Then everybody would kind of get laid off. Like it was a seasonal position. And then I had to like see who wanted to come back the next year and stuff like that. We had a lot of incidents. Like one of my offices was like deep in the hood. Someone got stabbed to death at the barbershop next door during tax season. And when I say next door, it's like if you've ever been to Philadelphia or New York, all the buildings are attached. So there was a small like convenience store next to me, and then next to them was a barbershop. And dude got stabbed broad daylight. I don't know, like 20 witnesses.
Oh my God.
And I watched them carry out the dude's body on a stretcher. I remember to this day, he's wearing like orange like Nike LeBrons or something. Dude. Just like not moving at all. The tax business is very predictable. You know that the 5th Monday of the year, which is typically like the first Monday in February, is the busiest day of the year because everybody has to get their W-2s by January 31st. It was the busiest day of the year, and this dude got stabbed. The street was shut down and all this shit. I remember I had cameras.
Like, back to work, guys. Let's go.
Well, I had cameras in the office, and the cops and the deputies and the detectives, they asked if they could borrow our back room. I looked through the camera, and they're just having a meeting, and there's like 10 of them. I get a call from the cops, and they're like, because they could see the camera, but they were like, can this audio record? And I'm like, no. And he's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And then he's like, okay. Basically, they were going to try to like seize the audio and like make me delete it. But yeah, that was just one of the crazy things that we dealt with. A lot of our clients, they were like, had just gotten out of jail. Like we'd be like, where'd you file your taxes last year? And they'd be like, oh, I was incarcerated last year. It was a crazy experience to be like thrown into business I was 18 then my first office was that one in the hood. And yeah, I learned a lot though.
If you're on the right path, everybody's right path is usually involving college. When did you decide that was not for you?
I wasn't a good student, and it just didn't mathematically make sense.
Yeah.
There was a few instances I remember where I was like, wait a minute, like this is stupid. And one was my English teacher in high school. She told me she graduated in 2003 and she was still paying her student loans, and it was 2011 or 12. So I was like, that kind of sucks. I didn't realize most people pay student loans for like a while. And then we had a career day, and they showed us like the average income of like 100 different professions. And the only that made 6 figures were like doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I was like, I'm not going to school that long. And then the third thing was my friend showed me this YouTube video documentary called The College Conspiracy. I actually just searched it up the other day. It's still on YouTube, and it'll like it's been up for like 12 years or 13 years, whatever. It was a mini documentary. It was like 50 minutes about how if you just go into the workforce, you're probably better off. Like if you become a plumber and you start off at like $30,000 a year and you work for 4 years, by the time someone gets out of college, you've already made 120 grand and your pay's gone up. So even if they're starting at a higher salary than you, they're so far behind the 8 ball.
Yeah, you're literally 200 grand ahead of them.
Right. I remember seeing that. And then they interviewed somebody in the documentary that was like a dentist or some high level position, but they took so much debt that they were like not able to pay it. And they were like just so behind on it that they were like never going to get out of it. And I was like, this really fucking sucks. There just has to be another way. I knew people who were truck drivers, and I knew you could make like 50 to 70K as a truck driver.
Yeah.
So I was like, worst case, like entrepreneurship doesn't work out. I'll drive trucks and I'll make, housing was cheap in the area. It was like $1,000 a month. I'll drive trucks and I'll save enough money to start another business or, invest in real estate or something like that. So I just knew that if I failed, it wasn't that bad. If you go to college and you fail, the consequences are dire and no fucking degree. But if you just do entrepreneurship and you fail, you could go bankrupt, you could start over, you could sell your assets, you could restructure. Like there's a lot of things you can do. All my friends were like, this seems pretty risky. And I was like, I think what you're doing is risky because there's 100% certainty that your outcome is fucking bullshit. And there's at least 1% chance that my outcome works out for me. It's more risky to do something that is going to be dumb and hope that it works out better for you than it is to do something that at least has a chance of getting you in a. And at the time, like I didn't know anybody that started a business in my entire life. No one in my family, no like family, friends, anything had ever started a business. So it seemed like such a far thing that it was a very, very, very low probability that would work out. But I was just like so hopeful. Like, dude, I had enough bullshit jobs to know that like probably like have killed myself. I worked at the Amazon warehouse. Jesus. 12-hour shifts. You get there at 7 p.m. You leave at 7 a.m. Just picking shit off endless hundreds of aisles of just shit. You get a little scanner and you walk around and the scanner has a timer, and that's how much time you have to get the next item. Sometimes you have to like borderline run if it's far, and then you put it in a little cart and then it goes to shipping and packing and all that shit. I was like, if I have to do this shit, like I would not make it.
In college, I got an internship at Ford Motor Company, and I was up in Michigan at like the world headquarters, and they had this Ford Experience science thing where you go and you tour the factory, and they literally have glass windows set up where you walk around and you look in and you watch people go and like do monotonous tasks over and over and over. And you're literally just standing there like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. Oh, look, they're inspecting the tires. And you come back 3 hours later, same guy, still inspecting the tires. Yeah. It's a very weird feeling. It's like you're looking at a human in a zoo. That goes to show that the people at the top, they'll keep the low people low and even go as far as like monetizing their performance at work by making it a tour. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I have mixed reviews on my experience. I think there's some people that college makes sense. It's like, yeah, you're not going to do anything else with your life, so go ahead and go to college and learn a skill and get the job. When I was deciding to go to college, I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. In high school, I had started clubs. I started a longboard company with Chris. And beyond that, I was just like, I want to go to college and learn and then get out and start a business. Yeah. Which looking back at that, I think that was a dumb choice.
Yeah, at that age, like you think college will help you with a business.
For sure.
But it's the worst education you can get for starting a business.
Yeah. So here's my college experience went. So I go to college, get 2 pretty good internships. I worked my sophomore year, or the summer after my sophomore year, I worked at Ford, which was like all of my classmates were like, how did you get that job? Like, that's crazy. Got out of that, was like, that's not for me because you're sitting in a cubicle all day. I could see what the job would be, and that's not my thing. So I quit, go to New York City the next summer, work at an ad agency because I'm interested in learning how to run ads and do all that stuff. And again, I was just working under people and having to research whatever they told me to research. I was working on the Visa account, so I had to research like credit cards and how to market them. And I was like, this is the worst. And then I get out of college and I start a job doing sales at ADP. And I was like, just kind of getting by, always thinking about what my next thing would be.
My cousin worked there. He is terrible.
Yeah, it's just not fun. And then a couple months later, I literally pay you to teach me business. And I learned more than I ever learned at college.
I felt like what we charged you was a sizable amount of money. Like being fresh out of the like college and stuff, I don't feel like I would have been confident enough to be like, oh yeah, this is gonna be worth it. Like it took me a while to build up to paying people like $5-10 grand to get information. Yep. I started with like $97 shit or $47 shit, then $297, and then I bought like $1,000 one, and that was like a huge thing for me. And then like a year later, I did like a 5K one, and then I did like a mastermind. So how did you like justify that? You were just like, yeah, this makes sense, which like I would not have been that way.
I don't know. We were kind of diving straight into it, right? So basically, Chris hits me up. He's like, hey, we're gonna get this Turo shit running up. We're gonna add as many cars as we possibly can, and we're gonna make it a service for people. And then we start talking to his buddy from college, John Weish, who is mutual friends with you. And so John's like, I've got the guy that's literally doing this, but for Airbnb. And he's making X amount right now. Like he just started this, but like it was like 2 months ago.
Probably like 3 or 4.
Yeah. And you would hit the ground running. So if he's doing that, we can literally just pay him what he's asking, and he's going to teach us how to do something similar. And even if it fails, like we know the blueprint of very successful business now. So Chris and I were actually talking about, this is before we even got connected with you for coaching. We were talking about buying your course so that we could learn your business and try to do the same thing, but for Turo. And then we were like, hold up, we can pay him less than his course costs.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah. But honestly, by buying it, you wouldn't have really learned like the marketing, the ad strategy and stuff like that. So it was better that spoke. I didn't think about this, but the program costs more and there's no like one-on-one in there.
Yeah. So we kind of got the best of both worlds because at some point Phil had just put us into the course.
Yeah.
And we were like, hold up, we just paid this much, less than what the actual course cost. And we still got into the course, and now we have learned the whole business.
Yeah.
And we're smart. One-on-one coaching with you guys. So we felt like we got out on top in that situation because we would have been spending a lot of money regardless to try to learn what y'all were doing. It definitely worked out. But I would say, so the biggest thing that I learned from that whole experience, from sitting down with you every single time, was mostly like just the scale that somebody can operate and that it's possible. Up until then, I didn't know it was possible to operate at such a big scale. You know, we would talk about, oh, we want to add like 50 cars in Denver. And I would be like, yeah, right, that's never going to happen. And then we sit down with you and just your expenses alone was more money than I've ever really seen in or out of an account. And I'm like, hold up, these are his expenses, but he's making this much? How do you get to the point where you trust yourself that much to throw down that type of money and expect it to come back?
A few things. Like, I remember when my business expenses, the first month they went up to like $7,000. And then I was like, fuck, dude, we got to make $7,000 before we even make $1. I had like a mini fucking panic attack. I talked to one of my friends and she was like, when you make more money, your expenses are going to go up. Like, that's how business works. And I was like, yeah, I guess I just got to like get comfortable with this. But a few things. We keep our fixed expenses as low as we can. So basically anything that is going to come out every month, the same amount. So software team is relatively fixed outside of the sales team. And, you know, anything that can be fixed, we try to keep it as fixed as possible. That lowers risk because that fixed amount, you can keep like 4 times that in your bank account. And you're like, okay, I got 4 months of runway. And then variable expenses like ad spend and sales commissions, those only go up if we're making more money or making more sales. So there's not a lot of risk in that. Like, if a big chunk of what we pay out every month is sales commission and ad spend, those are probably our top 2 expenses. And those are only going to come in as long as we're getting sales. So that gives me peace of mind. A few other things is we diversify traffic sources too. So we know we're not just like banking on one thing. And then we added additional back-end products. Half of our revenue is interior design. Let's say we don't make any sales for the next month or so or 2 months. We still know that we're going to do a decent amount of sales in interior design, which lowers as well, especially because we keep, you know, cash in the bank as well. The expenses kind of creep up slowly. So it's not like we go from like 0 to 100K in expenses overnight. There's a point where like it does get scary because like you just started touching like higher revenue. You don't know like is next month going to be the same. You don't want to run up your expenses. So you do kind of got to do a balancing act in that situation. You know, our expenses have been like over 100K a month for over a year now. After like 2 months or whatever, you're just desensitized to it. The longer you have a track record, your confidence gets built up. I heard a saying once, it was like, you could be the most confident person in the world, but if I put you in the cockpit of a plane and you've never flown a plane and you're confident that you can fly, you're kind of a fucking idiot. But if you're not a super confident person, but you have 1,000 hours in a simulator or something, or flight training, then you're going to feel pretty confident to fly that plane, regardless of if you're a naturally confident person. So it's the same thing with business. Like, the longer you do it, the more your confidence goes up to where like, I would not balk at like a $7,000 expense now because, you know, my track record. It's just like with lifting weights. Like, at first you can't even bench 25-pound dumbbells, but then, you know, you're doing 60s or 75s or whatever, and it's like, oh, of course I could do 25.
Also, I feel like the systems that you're building, like, you seem like a very data-driven person. So it seems like you make most of your decisions based on, like, I know for a fact that once I build this system, now I'm going to have X amount of dollars coming in, so I can put this much money into it, and we're going to be good. And you look at kind of the history of things. You sat us down and showed us an entire, like, spreadsheet of everything you were doing. Mm-hmm. You're like, this is where all the money goes here. This is where things go here. This is how many sales we're going to close because this is our history. So if you're building those systems and you know all the data behind it, it seems like a no-brainer because you just keep adding pieces and components.
Yeah, it's just math. Like, every business breaks down to client acquisition cost and cost of goods sold and stuff like that. So
yeah, I feel like I've kind of experienced the same stuff. Like, you just have to keep adding different systems and adding systems. It's a lot, but you have what, 40 employees right now running the ship?
Not all employees. Like, there's a lot of contractors, but they work like primarily with us. Probably like 35, 37, something like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
It rotates because the design team is the biggest team. There's like 16 people on the interior design team.
Yeah. Have you heard Steve Harvey's metaphor for take the lid off? I think this is, of all the online social media, Instagram advice from these famous people that go out and say whatever, I think this is what resonates most with me. So he talked about, if you take a gnat, just a little bug gnat, it can jump like 36-inch vert. But if you put a gnat into a jar and you close the lid on it, it's only going to jump up its head on the ceiling the first few jumps, and then it's going to adapt, and it's never going to jump higher than the ceiling anymore. And then if those gnats in the jar have a kid, the kids, all they're going to know is being able to jump as high as the ceiling or a little bit lower than the ceiling. But then you take the lid off the jar and they're able to jump 36-inch verts. Because they still have the same makeup. And I think that's kind of how I felt going into this whole business. Was my whole upbringing. I saw certain things and I was like, oh, you go to college and you get out, and if you're lucky, you're making 65 grand off the bat out of college, and you can start paying off your expenses. But now looking at this whole different level, this whole different part of like careers in general, I can see how high you can actually go in those regards. So it's really cool to be able to see. And I think that's why like a mentor is so important, because you can see what's been done and you can start taking leaps in the same direction.
Yeah. And like the shit that I showed you guys was years of like training and learning and events and shit like that. So I spun my wheels for a while because I just refused to pay anybody. Like I was just like, I don't know. I had like pride of like, I need to be able to figure this out myself. Like I need to be smart enough to figure this out, which was just dumb. Like I could have gotten a lot further, a lot faster.
And I think I'm the same way. So that's the first time I ever worked with somebody to teach me how to do things that I just paid out of pocket. Even with Turo, like I had one guy that I ever talked to and got his advice. Otherwise, I was like, I'm smarter than most Turo hosts. Like I can make my own systems. But if I would have gone to somebody that had already built what we had, I think I would have avoided so many headaches. Like it got bad. It got to be like one headache after another. I lost all my weekends. Like I was just dealing with bullshit all the time. Now I have people that approach me and I'm like, you're so smart for doing that, because I'm going to tell you straight up what to do in every single aspect. I want to talk more about BnB Leverage. Where did the idea even stem from?
I had gotten into the Airbnb space and everybody was like asking me about it, like all my friends and stuff. And I saw that there was a lot of like gurus and stuff out there, and my business partner, he has Airbnbs too, so he approached me about like doing like a coaching program around it, and I was like, and it seems like that space is already covered. Like there's enough fucking gurus in the Airbnb space. I wanted to come up with something different, so I came up with our offer, which is basically do it for you. Basically the hardest parts of the process, and I figured out it's a lot easier for someone to just figure out how to buy their own fucking Turo car, and it's a lot harder for you to do it for a bunch of people at scale. So it was the same thing for us, but we realized that we could make a lot of money if we did the things that people didn't want to do. Like people were terrified of pitching a landlord. They're not going to punch you, like they're in the phone. So we just took the hardest parts of the process and offered it as like done for you. Because of my marketing knowledge, I knew that a done for you offer would work. It was kind of tough in the beginning. Like no one had done this. We weren't sure if it was even possible, because you know, finding remote properties for people that are also not in the same location as the property, it's just incredibly difficult. You know, we would try, and if we could figure it out, then we would get rewarded for that. First like 8 months were really, really fucking hard to figure out the fulfillment and everything. And I had a lot of doubts along the way of like, can we even figure this out at scale? Can we keep this going? And we just, you know, kept chipping away until we got into like a really, really good place.
At least from an outsider's perspective, it seems like it was a smooth ride the whole way. What was something that was not a smooth, like what was the hardest part about it?
Dude, figuring out how to get people that live in California to rent properties in Florida that they've never seen, that we've never seen, and convince the landlord to let us Airbnb it. Like just those three things logistically are just very fucking difficult. And then now we get the properties inspected, and like we're doing this in a bunch of different places. So getting the property inspected in fucking Florida when you're in Denver and the clients in California. Now we've worked in most cities in Florida, but if it's a new market where we don't have connections or anything, just figuring all of that out was very fucking hard. Honestly, the sales side has been a lot easier. Not that it's been easy. We had both run sales teams in the past, so we at least knew how to run a sales team and how to do marketing and what kind of ads work and media buying and stuff like that. So that part we figured out pretty quickly, but the fulfillment and the logistics, it's very intricate and complex. We're still improving it a lot, but it's gotten a million times better than like a year ago.
On our end, we have refined processes like monthly. Like we'll do something and then be like, this whole thing doesn't make sense. We need to change that. What's something that y'all have changed? Like what's a big change that you didn't see coming and then it kind of happened?
We've had times where like our interior designer flies out to furnish a property, and there was a tenant in the property prior, so we didn't get like a really good video walkthrough or anything like that, and they show up and like there's no hot water or whatever, there's something missing or whatever. We now have an inspector that comes in. We literally made up a whole like sheet of things that they have to go through and to give us pictures of it and give us a report of it. So that was a big thing. The process of how we find properties that are profitable has changed a lot. Like there's so many variables now, whereas before we were just like, yeah, it looks good. It has AirDNA, good AirDNA numbers, which is like the program we use to comp properties. We look at the comp property calendars. We look at what's close by. We look at all these different factors, and we look at the crime score. That's a big one,
really?
like property crime, violent crime in an area. And then we take that into account because, for example, the place where we are right now, where you live, because we're in a downtown area, property crime in this area is like 5 times the national average. Yeah, because there's homeless people. It's a downtown area. Any downtown area is like that. So if you have a property crime threshold, let's say it's like over like double the national average, that sounds really bad, but you're going to miss out on a lot of places that are good for short-term rental because higher downtown populated areas have higher property crime. So stuff like that, you got to be able to figure that out, make an algorithm for it so that you're not getting properties in bad neighborhoods. So we've had to put systems in place around that. We've had to put systems in place around just making sure that regulations are fair in the areas that we have these short-term rentals. So being able to like read regulations in all these different cities, call local cities, stuff like that. It's all stuff that we've like implemented.
Yeah, so I think all of that you said, that very much justifies why somebody would pay for that. You've literally built like every single piece of the pie to get the right Airbnb for people. And then I know from my experience with like Turo cars, if you make one mistake buying a Turo car, then you literally just screwed yourself. And I've seen that over and over and over. So I guess I wanted to ask you, because you got involved with Turo a little bit, had a Turo car up with us. Airbnb or Turo?
Depends how much starting capital you have and how much risk you want to take and all that stuff. If you're managing yourself, not managing yourself. What I like about Turo is like you can get in it with a couple $1,000s and it's relatively low amount of work. So if you're just trying to get into investing and you know you live in Denver or wherever, you buy a car, you park it outside your house, you get an unlimited wash thing, you rent it out, you make a couple $100 a month. There's not a lot that can go wrong that would be like devastating. So yeah, I like that about it. But obviously, like I like Airbnb. I'm a real estate guy. My best property last month did 28 grand in revenue, about 15K profit, and that's after management and everything. So yeah, I mean that's more than most people. That's like triple times the national fucking salary.
Yeah.
And I didn't do anything last month for it. We did a lot of work up front and stuff.
I completely agree. Like if you want a low risk investment or one that you can, you know, do one and then do like 5 more, Turo makes sense. But if you have the capital to put into it, I think Airbnb is, at some point we'll talk and I need to do my first Airbnb property. It just makes sense. Like real estate's awesome. And especially with Chris, my brother, he's now at 3 properties, and so he's pretty tenured as well with it all. So I'm gonna need to jump into that myself once I can get some time on my plate, because it definitely is gonna take some time. I feel like it's kind of a time intensive investment.
Yeah, and like arbitrage is the low risk way to get into Airbnb. My first deal was a house that I bought, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I'm very lucky that it went the way that it did, because I could have made like really big mistakes by just not know, like I didn't know anything, how to do research, how to comp a property or anything like that. I just got really lucky that I bought a decent property and I did a really good design that people liked. But I've seen people get in, try it on their own, and they just do a dog shit design and basically just blow a bunch of money.
Yeah, so I've got my roommate actually just moved in. He owns a house in Phoenix, and he's like, yeah, I threw it up on Airbnb. I barely break even with the mortgage. And I'm like, I don't get how that's happening. Like I've got a friend in Denver that's making thousands a month.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything else. Like, so just the term alone, threw it up. Like I threw it up on Airbnb. I don't throw anything up. Like it's very fucking methodical. And I know exactly what the plan is, and I know exactly what the comps are making, and I know exactly how much money it's going to take to get it to that level or better, ideally better, and I know exactly how much it can make. Most people, they just, oh, I got this property, let me throw it up and see what happens. It's like any business. But I take it very seriously, so I extract the maximum value out of every property.
What would you say the biggest mistake for a beginner Airbnb host?
Shitty furniture and shitty pictures.
Okay.
What I do is like I look at the comps and I look at the properties in that area that are doing well. On AirDNA, you can see the revenue of the properties, and I make sure that I know what it's going to take to get it to that level. So yeah, I go in with like a very methodical approach. There's zero risk for me. Like I know it's going to work well before I put in $1 into the deal. So I think a lot of people, they just, let me throw it up on there and see what happens. There's a lot to the algorithm. If you end up on page 5, it's like being on page 5 of Google. Like no one's going to find you.
Yeah, nobody's going to touch it.
But there's tricks to stay on page 1. A lot of that is just from learning, seeing this in different markets, testing things with my own properties, and so on.
What tricks do you use?
The biggest one is like if you're on page 3, let's say your average daily rate is $300. Airbnb is very seasonal too, which people don't understand. They think if you make $5 grand in 1 month, like we made 28 grand on that property last month. That was probably the best month of the year. This month, I think we're at that same properties at like 25, but next month it's probably gonna be like 20, 22. And then in January, it might be like 15 or 14. So that's a big difference. Depending on when you jump in, you might jump in at the high time of the year where you're getting like $400 a night and you're like trying to keep it there.
Yep.
And basically the way Airbnb works is if you're not getting booked, they're like, oh, this isn't a good value. Let me push this to the next page or whatever. And you just keep falling in the ranking. Like, for example, if you look at my calendar, I had 1 month on one property where my highest daily rate was like $700 a night. 4 or 5 of the days got booked for $110 a night. The reason I do that is because 1, I make like an extra $1,000 off the property, but 2, the property stays 100% occupied. So all my properties, like if you look at my reports, it's like 95%, 100% occupancy. Then Airbnb is like, okay, every time someone looks at this property, they end up booking. They have a good booking rate. So it's a good value. So any day that you search and it's available, let's show this one first, especially if it's like a last minute orphan day, which means it's like, let's say you're booked like Friday to Monday, and then you're booked next week, like Thursday to Saturday. So like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's rare that you're going to get a midweek booking for $500 a night from a Tuesday to a Thursday. So I'll drop that down to like 150, 180 just to make sure that it gets booked. So I'll do that and stay 100% occupied. And then anytime someone searches my property, it's like, this is a rare find. JR's place is usually booked, and it keeps me at the top of the algorithm. That's one of the things. There's a lot more to it, but I would say that's a big one that people mess up a lot.
Okay. I think that's smart because just with my experience on Turo to mess with where you go up in the rankings, and you have to hit so many things all at once. It's kind of crazy. Like a lot of people think the same thing. Just throw up your car on Turo, and they go around the car. They take these shitty pictures. You can barely even tell what the car looks like. And then they wonder why they're not getting any bookings. And there's a lot of things. Like I take very professional pictures of the cars that I do. I have the Denver Broncos stadium in the city of Denver as a backdrop of every single photo. And there's a lot that goes into it. So
even like, small things like that, like Airbnb, they can read your image quality. So if you have shitty pictures, they're automatically like, they don't want their brand to be like associated with trash.
Yeah.
So if they have a shitty picture, they're like, okay, let's push this guy down. So when you jump on Airbnb, there's not this ugly ass house. And then people get the impression that Airbnb is just ugly ass houses. They have a pretty solid algorithm to figure out what your property should be priced at and what you can get per night. So if you just kind of play their game, they reward you by just giving you more visibility. And it's essentially like most companies, 30% of the budget goes to marketing. Airbnb is doing all the marketing for you, and they're taking 3%. So you got to kind of play to what they like. And what they like is what's going to get your property booked out more.
Yep. They only take 3%?
From the host, yeah.
Oh, that's
but
crazy.
then there's a service fee that they charge the guests, and they're like double dipping.
Yeah, so they make a lot of money. This is one of the craziest things. Turo does their protection plan, right? So if you're a guest, you can choose your protection level. You can get minimum, standard, premier, or you can decline it altogether. Now the host also has a protection plan, and you can do like the 90 plan, which means you keep 90% of the earnings from that trip, or you can do the 85, 80, and so on. And then if there's damage on the car, they go to the host and they say, hey, you've got, the 90 plan, which means you owe us a $2,500 deductible before you get paid for anything like the car. And then they go separately to the guest and they say, hey, guest, you got a protection plan that's a $500 deductible. You owe us $500. So say, for example, there's $1,000 of damage. They're going to collect the full $1,000 from the host, and then they're going to go to the guest and take $500 from the guest. So off of $1,000 of damage in that scenario, they're literally pocketing $1,500. I guess profiting $500, which is crazy. So there's a lot of ways that, Turo and Airbnb, they just pocket extra money on the side. And it makes sense. Like a lot of people will find out about that and be like, why would I ever use Turo? Why would I ever use Airbnb? But you're right. Like it's literally all of your marketing. It's everything that you need to get guests. And then if you want to, you can stay in touch with those people and do your own thing on the side, and rent out privately. I want to kind of wrap up, but first I want to ask, you are doing all this business stuff, right? You're super busy. How do you balance the busy business stuff out and enjoy your day-to-day every day?
If you look at my calendar, people are shocked. Like business people especially, I show them my calendar, they're shocked. Like today was actually probably a little busier because I have this, and then after this we're doing like a photo shoot with my car or something. But just like pick any random day throughout the week. Like look at today's Friday, look at Thursday and Wednesday or whatever.
You don't do anything.
I have a lot of open space, and the reason is because we've always looked to delegate everything as quickly as possible. Like learn it, delegate it. The whole company's delegated. I'm still very involved. Like we have the management meetings. We have Slack. I read all the chats. Anything that's happening in the company right now, I know about it, or the majority of things that I need to know about. So we've delegated, and that kind of took a while, and it was very busy to get to that point. But now, like, I don't do any of the hiring. I don't do any of the training. I used to do the hiring and the training. I don't find any leases. I don't do any sales calls. I don't do the media buying. Occasionally we have to film some ads, but like those will be good for like 6 months. I've just really worked hard to get out of the day-to-day. I think one of the reasons we can do this is because our lifetime value is pretty good. So we have very healthy margins, allows us to hire talented people. Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't start a business that doesn't have amazing margins because it's just impossible to delegate. The rest of the time, my calendar is pretty open, but I remember reading like Donald Trump's book, and he like breaks down his day, and he's like, my calendar is pretty open every day, and he just does what he feels needs to be done that day. So I'm kind of the same way. So today, like, although my calendar's open, I got on the team meeting at 10. That was over by 10:30. Then I had 30 minutes before my next meeting. Basically, I just like looked at some real estate deals. I jumped on that meeting at 11. One of the guys that was supposed to be on the meeting, he broke 3 ribs or some shit, so we had to reschedule that. And then from there, 11 to noon, I was free. So I underwrote a real estate deal, called the seller, gave him the offer. He verbally accepted the offer. I looked at a couple other deals, and then we had lunch at noon with like our banker guy, and then I came here. And then after this, like, we're doing like this video, whatever, with my car. And then outside of that, like, I'll probably go drive to look at a deal today. So it's just a lot of like whatever I feel like needs to get done based on the goal that I'm trying to accomplish. I'm like, well, what's the most important thing to accomplish this? And I just focus on that. So I have a lot of open time, but it's filled with like, exercise a lot, go on walks. I do make phone calls. I browse real estate deals. I just explore like thoughts that I have. Like I'm like, I wonder how real estate works in like this part of town or that part of town. I'll just spend 30 minutes looking at listings. I'll make a phone call, ask some questions. I'll research something. I'll talk to a seller. I'll underwrite a deal. So it's kind of just like whatever comes up that I feel like needs to get done. And then everything, I'm all about delegation. So I don't spend any time on like managing Airbnbs or anything like that. I have long-term rentals. I have a property management company. I have a property management company in Denver. I have one in Florida. I have a manager in Denver for my Airbnbs. I have a separate one in Florida. So I try to delegate it, even if it means taking less money, because I know in the long run, if you're delegating, like I self-managed my Airbnb, my first like few for a while. All it did was demotivate me from getting another one, because I was like, if I get another one, now I have to take more time. So as soon as I outsourced management, I picked up another one, a couple months later, because now I was like, wow, this is nice. I don't have to do anything. So let's get 10 of them. I think not delegating holds you back from growing. I know in the beginning, like, it is good to have healthy cash balance, like 6 months of cash or whatever. But once you get there, then it's just focus on like hiring, delegating, because that shit's fucking hard. It's going to take a lot of time. It's probably going to be the hardest thing that you learn how to do in business. So yeah, now I'm able to be at the point where like my calendar is very, very flexible, and I'm netting 6 figures a month. I never thought you could have both, like net 6 figures and have free time. But that's just allowed me, like, I'm never going to stop working. So it's just allowed me to really just be like, okay, well, what exactly do you want? How do we find another deal? How do we find a better deal?
And I think a lot of people will hear that and be like, what the fuck? Like, this guy is doing no work. He has everybody working for him, and he's just pocketing money. People will hear that and make that assumption.
Yeah.
But somewhat true. Sure, but you worked for it, first of all. And second of all,
we took all of the risk. We had months where we did negative $15,000 a month.
Yep.
And those months are the worst because we busted our ass. Like, if you know you're going to lose money, you start busting your ass.
Yep.
So imagine busting your ass for a month, and then like your employer comes to you and then takes $15,000 out of your bank account after you just busted your ass. So we went through shit like that, and we took a lot of risk. We thought about quitting. We were like, bro, how much longer can we stomach like $15K a month losses? After going through that, when people say shit like that, I'm like, cool, well, like, fuck, try it. Like, do it yourself.
I would also say, if you're running the ship, right, you need to have time to actually explore your thoughts and go through a creative process with the business. Like, there's a lot of things that you're doing with the business that I'm sure you wouldn't have been doing if you had to spend, 40 hours a week doing X, Y, and Z. Yeah,
and also, like, dude, we've provided like some really fucking good jobs. Yep. Like, my last company was run all through like VAs in the Philippines and shit. But now I'm like, dude, these are like solid. Like, you get to work from home. You make very very good money. We treat you very well. We don't put a cap on like time off that you take. We do a lot of like paid time off. So it's a solid gig. Yeah, that's because, you know, we ended up taking all the risk. We're providing all these jobs that stimulates the economy. So we should be paid for handsomely. If not, it's just not fucking worth it.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to do this shit if there's not a chance that you're going to have a lot of upside. Like I saw a sticker one time on a fucking Prius that said a billionaire should not exist. And I'm like, bitch, for you to have this fucking Prius, someone has to be a billionaire. There is no millionaire that can build Toyota. It's so fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And I was just like, these people, like, they just don't get it. There's a subreddit. I love Reddit.
Yeah.
I don't comment too much, but I'll read a lot of very diverse things on Reddit. It gives you access to people that you normally wouldn't interact with.
Sure.
But there's one called Anti-Work, but it's about all these people that are just, they hate working. It's framed in a way of like, fuck the establishment. My boss is such an asshole. Yeah. Basically, the premise of this Anti-Work subreddit is people will post screenshots of like conversations between them and their boss where their boss is like, hey, I need you to come in tomorrow. And they're like, I have the day off tomorrow. And they're like, no, but I need you to come in. And they're like, I have the day off. They're like, well, if you don't come in, then you can just, you know, never come in again or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Then they'll just kind of like 1,000 people just bitch about the thread. And I remember one time there was someone was talking about Little Caesars that they worked at. And they were like, my boss ended up just shutting the place down and he knew we all wanted more money. And then one of the comments was like, wow, that's so crazy that he'd rather shut the place down than just make $200,000 a year instead of $300,000 a year. And I'm like, you fucking idiots. Like, you really think that this guy, he's like, I'd rather make zero than pay these people more and just let me just shut the place down. Don't forget about this conversation. Go tonight, go to Anti-Work subreddit and just fucking read. Go to like filter it by like top posts or controversial in the last month, year, quarter, and you'll just read the stupidity that people think of how they think the world works. Because you'll never find anybody who's run a business saying stupid shit like this. I mean, I used to think the same way. Like, I worked at this place called BJ's Wholesale Club. It was like the equivalent to Sam's Club, but it's only in the Northeast, I think. I would work the register all day. At the end of the day, your register prints out a total of all the balance of that you process in credit cards. So my register alone did like 23 grand, and I was only there like 4 hours. So I'm like, I count up all the people, I count up all the registers, I count up all the shifts, and I'm like, holy shit, this place is raking it the fuck in. And then later on, I found out that, number one, it's a wholesale club. So how much do you think their margins are? Like, they're selling 3 loaves of bread for the price you would get 1 loaf. Later found out they're making like 1 to 2% gross margins on the item. Gross margins. That means if they bought it for $10, they're making 2% on that. And then they have to pay, like, that's the cost of the goods sold. Jesus. And then they have to pay everybody else. The way they make most of their money is the $50 a year membership to be part of the club. I was like, man, they're making so much money. And like, there's somebody that owns this place and I've never even met them. They've never even been here. And I'm like busting my ass here every day. Now I look back and I'm like, that's so fucking stupid. My skill was virtually zero. I was a cashier. It took like a day of training to learn the job. I had no skills. And they had taken a ton of debt and risk to open this place up. Like, that place probably cost fucking $100 million to open up. And then you got to make it back on 1 to 2% margins. It's probably like 10 years before they even break even on that deal. So when you're a fucking moron, you don't understand things like that. You don't understand how business actually works, and that a lot of these small businesses actually aren't making that much fucking money. So that guy, if he shut down that Little Caesars, all you're seeing is what he's paying you. You're not seeing the rent cost. That's probably exorbitant because Little Caesars has to be in a retail location next to a fucking Walmart, paying 13 grand a month for it to even work. And then they're selling $5 pizzas, and then they're paying your dumbass $15 an hour now because that's the minimum wage. And then they have royalties to the franchisor, and then they have to pay taxes. So like, the poor guy probably just couldn't make it anymore. No one's going to shut down a profitable company, especially without trying to sell it or whatever. So I realized that just comes from a place of just being extremely fucking ignorant and uneducated.
If any of those people that are in the anti-work and hate work saw an opportunity to go and take a job or start their own business and start making a bunch of money, you know for a fact that their perspective would flip instantly. As soon as they're kind of like up towards the top, they're going to be thinking about things completely differently. Like, holy shit, I just put in so much work to be here. I just did X, Y, and Z. If you had to give them one piece of advice to escape their NPC lifestyle and be able to go do their own thing or somehow enjoy working again, what would you tell them?
Specifically, like, people in that subreddit?
People that have that mindset.
I'll talk to the people in the subreddit. So go to the fucking dollar store, get some hair dye, and change your hair back from blue to red. Or sorry, blue to black. And then pick up some fucking books about, like, start with Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Pick up some books about, like, I'm reading this book right now because I'm on 75 hard, so I got to read a book every day. It's called Am I Being Too Subtle by Sam Zell. the guy's like a billionaire now, and it's all about like how he built his real estate empire and negotiated deals and found opportunities and stuff like that. Actually, this would be a really good one for the anti-work people. Read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
So good.
Because that dude was
He
borderline
grinded.
bankrupt for 20 fucking years.
Yep.
Bro, 20 years. Like, you're reading the story and you're like, oh, okay. Like, you're thinking like, oh, after this one, he ends up making it.
Yeah, that's when
And then he
Nike
runs
happens.
into another fucking like 5-year legal lawsuit hurdle or some shit. And then you're like, okay, this has to be it. Then he signs Michael Jordan, right? And then
Yep.
it's like, no, boom, another fucking thing happens. He's almost bankrupt. And then it's just like 20 years of this shit. I know I'm resilient and everything, but I don't think I could take 20 years of being fucking broke and grinding my ass off without the certainty that it's actually going to work. So when you read that book, you're like, oh, this guy definitely deserves to be a billionaire, because not many people would have. And he addresses a lot of things too. Like, he talks about how people say Nike uses sweatshops and shit like that. It's a very good autobiography on what it actually takes to win, because if you read that and you're like, oh, fuck no, I'm not doing this shit, then like, that's fine. You belong as an employee. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I love my employees. Employees are very necessary.
Yep.
But then you know why you're not going to be able to be the person that gets the biggest payoff. And a lot of these anti-work people, they think that they're like, well, this person's making 100 times more his employees and all this shit. He should just make a lot less and then split that amongst the employees. But if you took all the risk, it's not even like you get all the reward. Like, a lot of people are sharing in this with you too, but you want to get paid for your time and and the bullshit that you endured.
I mean, they took the job in the first place, right? Like, you're not going to take a job working for somebody and then be like, what the fuck afterwards, right? Like, you agree to a certain amount. All right, so I rent out my place to a bunch of people and I don't have to pay for rent.
Like, I have a rule. Like, for example, we rent this boat like once a year. And if you organized it and
I like
you
this already.
got it rented, did all this shit, then you should just upcharge everybody else like $20-$30 so that you get to go for free.
Yep.
Because you're not getting paid for your time of organizing all this shit. And I think that's completely fair.
Yeah.
Like, if you organize the shit, then you should basically, your compensation should be that you get to go for free. Anybody doesn't like that, then cool, then they'll organize. Like, I'm totally fine with you organizing it and me not having to do shit and me paying a little bit more.
Yep.
So I think that makes complete sense.
It's crazy. People have the wrong mindset with a lot of things and just play victim for some reason, when you can just go out there. Like, we're in a place where you can literally go out on the street and find something for free, turn around and sell it for $200. Like, figure something out, you know? Yeah, either way, I appreciate you being on the podcast, and I'll probably have you back at some point.
Yeah.
Because
it was good.
I'm trying to like up the amount of podcasts that I do so that I can get used to the interviews and developing all the questions and everything. But definitely appreciate you being on.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Peace.